welcome back to our qualitative conversations through Research Talk. I'm Ray Maeda, president of Research Talk. I'm also a qualitative sociologist, and my main areas of interest are in personal relationships, doing a study now on lifelong friendship where we're doing dyadic interviews with pairs of friends, which is beyond fun. Today, we're going to be talking with Elaine Keane, and we're talking about a course she's presenting for us on July 29th during our Qualitative Research Summer Intensive, and it's called Qualitative Data Generation, Conducting Interviews, Focus Groups, and Field Observations. So Elaine will introduce herself in a moment, and we'll get a short conversation going here. And meanwhile, Paul Mijas, my colleague, is here joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick, Paul?
Sure. I'm Paul Mijas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Odom Institute for Research in Social Science at UNC Chapel Hill. And I've also been with Research Talk since 2001 as a consultant.
Thank you very much, Paul. And Jeff, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ray. Sure, I'm Jeff Petrozelli. I'm also with Research Talk. I'm a qualitative research specialist here, and I've been with Research Talk since 2001.
Great. And Elaine, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll roll into our conversation.
Thanks, Ray. Yep, I'm Elaine Keane. I'm professor and head of the discipline of education in the School of Education, University of Galway. So next stop, the USA. We're right on the edge of Europe. Yes, I am a sociologist of education, and I'm heavily invested in qualitative methods as well. I teach them across all of our programs and in many places around the world. But my favorite place, and I'm not just saying this because I'm here, is most definitely Research Talk, where I get to work with very much like-minded colleagues. And I think we were trying to work out, I think it's about 3 years that I'm with you now.
Wonderful. Great. And when we think about this particular course, it fits kind of this mission that we have of helping people make sense of not just qualitative data, but the data process. And just for you, when you think about how you put this class together, how you'll execute it, how will this course content really help users, many of them brand new, others experienced, in their journey to figure out, wait a minute, how do I make sense of the data and the process?
Sure. Well, I think making sense of data often implies just analysis, doesn't it? We ain't going anywhere with analysis unless we have good data. And we're not going to get good data unless we plan for good data. So and as you know, I do another course on planning. These are all just very much intertwined with me, and I've talked about this before, the necessity of working backwards, that it's all about planning for getting good data before we can ever make sense of it. There's no point making sense of bad data, right? We need to make sense of good data. So I suppose we have to first get data. We have to make sure it's of good quality. So for me, really, it is the backbone of any project, because, if you don't have quality input, you absolutely are not going to have quality output. It's just a fact. So I suppose the day that I do on data generation is very much based on that understanding. There's a few different parts of the day after the general session, which for me is very important. It sets the tone. It talks about issues to do with, fundamentals in terms of ethos and, of qualitative inquiry, and issues to do with philosophy, all of which I think are quite important. But then it goes on to practicalities, and I focus on 3 different aspects of data generation, or 3 different forms or types, if you like. And I just I choose and do the most popular. So these are individual interviews, focus group interviews, and field observations. So all of these, as you know, are really key data generation mechanisms in the qualitative domain. And actually, I might just say a little word about the title, because that notion of data generation is very important to me. And this is actually, before, Ray, you mentioned that notion of practice being based on principles. Here's a really good example of that, actually, because I think when we have the fundamentals of the qualitative ethos of qualitative inquiry and the kind of the emphasis on lived experience and co-production and so forth, we become clear quite quickly that we're not collecting data. That has a very kind of a positivist sort of orientation, that we're just extracting. I really dislike that. And over time I became quite uncomfortable writing it. And I remember halfway through the book that I did with Robert Thornberg on constructivist grounded theory in educational research, I said to him, would you mind if we switch all mentions of data collection to data generation, because I'm just really increasingly uncomfortable with it. And he said, no, I'm fine with it. I agree with you. Let's do it. So from then on, we started saying data generation. And I suppose it isn't just from a grounded theory or constructivist grounded theory perspective. It is more general, that I think really in the qualitative domain, we are co-producing, we're co-constructing, we're co-making the data that we subsequently co-interpret. So let me just get back to the parts of the course.
One thing on that, Elaine, that's really powerful too, is when you just said that you're kind of out there taking it. So it does imply that it's out there to collect, almost like, the tradition people have who collect Easter eggs. Somebody puts them out there, and then, they send out kids and it's fun. And how many did you collect? So it really is a different thing, this idea of co-generation. It's a powerful shift. Yeah.
It really is. I like that idea. Yes, you're not setting people out with a basket to collect. Exactly.
Right.
And I think that's really important. And actually, that ties in really well to what I was going to talk about that. Because in my practice, and this is one of the things that I kind of focus on in the data generation course, actually across the different areas. And it's something that I've kind of learned from my practice, that with my doctoral researchers or postdoctoral researchers or any beginning qualitative researcher, I get them very often and very early in their process to do a pilot interview, and all that entails, the planning, the designing, the draft interview schedule, the logistics, doing an interview, transcribing some coding, and then we come back and we unpack it all together. And what I always see, and this is completely normal, and I talk about this during the course, is really an over-focus on the researcher and an under-focus on the participant. And what I mean by that is they're not really listening to the participant at the start. In my view, as I said, real qualitative work, and this comes back to your point exactly, it's entering into a kind of a relational experience with our participant, with a person. We're entering their world from their perspective and following their stories. And to me, that's such a privilege. But I think, when we're starting qualitative work, beginning qualitative researchers are understandably quite focused on themselves, and I don't mean in a selfish sort of a way. I mean in a kind of a, oh my god, what's happening next, because there's a lot going on, right? For any beginning researcher, what are my questions, what do I say then, is the tape working, or all the logistics. It's completely natural, but I think it's so important, and I do focus on this quite a bit in the course, that with the participant we listen and follow. And I repeat that so often with my students. What we need to do more of here is, what am I going to say? And they go, listen and follow. So when we go through, I actually we tear apart transcripts afterwards, and we look at them, and we see so many instances of not listening, of leading questions. So how might we rephrase that in a more open way? But also really interesting examples of where a participant may have mentioned something, a clear flag that it was important to them, and somewhere we could have followed, but we didn't quite get it because we're so focused on ourselves. And look, that takes practice, it takes maturity. But I have found that simply flagging that and showing it in a transcript and having an opportunity to discuss that can really start that ball rolling and really help researchers start to think about how to get quality data. So it's stuff like that we talk about in this course, the procedures and processes in which we need to engage to produce, to co-construct quality data, and that will eventually help us to make better sense of it.
It's interesting too, when you think about the way you've put that, the listen and follow, that skill is invaluable for what we do in qualitative inquiry. And it also is one of the hardest things to get people to do well, but it's transferable, isn't it? It's not just general to qualitative inquiry. This is a skill that will be useful as a teacher, as a parent, as on and on. There's something to getting that process right that moves beyond just the world of research, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And how many of us really listen? And haven't they've found that more generally, that even in just social discourse, most people are waiting to give their next answer rather than really, really listening. So
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
skill we have to learn.
Yeah, yeah, being prepared before they really know what is in front of them. Paul, you've been thinking a lot about kind of lessons the as a scholar instructor folks learn over time, and so I know that you had an interest in asking Elaine something about that before we close out this part of the conversation.
So, right, I'm just wondering about how over the course of teaching this topic, what you've learned about presenting it and how it can be taught productively.
Okay. Yes, well, it was my first time doing it with yourselves in Research Talk last year, but I have been teaching this for very many years in my own university and elsewhere. And I went back through the feedback from the participants, which is always so useful. And one person did ask for more detail, I noticed, on the facilitation skills necessary for interviews and focus groups, and talking about maybe even getting some space to practice that. So that links in exactly with what we've been just talking about. And I can see how absolutely it would be valuable. Look, the quality of our data is massively impacted, isn't it, by researchers' skill? And actually, I think it's always quite unfair that this is such an issue, because it's very hard for beginning researchers to have these skills, Now, I think, in any course, there's a lot you have to cover. You're impacted by time constraints, but also by logistics, not just by teaching online, but I think you might need a little bit more time to really look at the facilitation skills that are required. Now we do a bit of it, and I talk quite a bit about it. But it's something that I'm going to think about a little bit more to see how maybe I could build a little bit more detail into this course about these key interview facilitation skills, and maybe a few extra ways of exemplifying good practice. Kathy does a great job in her books, though, about of this. So I always point people towards useful examples. And you know what, we all just have to read, I think, more examples of studies that have done good interview work. And we can, but I think it's very often we don't see examples published where you can actually see the conversation between the researcher and the participant and how it evolves. And Kathy actually includes quite extended extracts from her studies, sometimes stretching over 2 or 3 pages, where you can really see the development and how she sits back and enters that relational process with the participant. So that is the sort of thing I think that we need to work on, and to have space to develop a little bit more.
Mhm.
Elaine, your nonverbal there perfectly married with what you were saying, and it also fit generation, kind of, your hand movement, but even kind of your physical back and forth really reflects, the activity, the actions, the interactions. So that was a really nice flow we had there. So, all right, well, thank you so much. We're looking forward to the one-day course again on July 29th. And so we appreciate it. And thank you to Paul and Jeff. We'll close out this portion of the conversation. We'll have one other little tidbit that we encourage you to take a look at too. That'll happen in just a few minutes. So we're going to go ahead and close out. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.